What is up, traders? Order flow is often seen as the golden goose of the trading communities. Everyone wants to know everything about order flow, but it is a very complex aspect. Now, what's right, what's wrong, how to effectively look and use order flow, that's always been the real question, right? Looking at the DOM, looking at this, looking at that. And today, in this video, I'm going to simplify all of that, and we're going to be talking about the epitome of order flow, delta. So delta is one of the easiest concepts to understand in trading, and we're going to be using two different delta aspects and charts to break that down. And I'm going to be providing those for free if you guys stick around. So let's dive right into this intro. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let's talk about delta. So delta. What is delta? First and foremost, delta is the at the ask traded volume minus at the bid traded volume. It's a difference between aggressive buying, aggressive selling, and it could be denoted in multiple different visual aspects. So what I like about delta is it gives you a strong differential between who's actually getting more aggressive, who's getting absorbed, who's getting trapped, exhausted, all of that. There are two different delta charts that I'm going to focus on. We can take a look at the S&P or the NASDAQ, but we've got the S&P right here on the screens. The first thing we're going to be taking a look at is the delta profile. Now, right here on the screen, this is an individual session delta profile. This delta profile is based on a cluster of 8 ticks, so 2 points, clustered delta bars at these areas. So it's horizontally, it's like a histogram. The other aspect of delta that we're going to be breaking down is going to be these colored bars. You may have seen them in a lot of places, but these colored bars are a combination of cumulative delta and an oversold, overbought oscillator. So what we see here is going to be aggressive buying and selling. So what do we do with this information? Now, first and foremost, I like to focus on the idea of delta profiles, right? Delta profiles, what they give us is a visual volume profile understanding, but with a mix of order flow. So why focus on delta in terms of order flow? Why not look at the DOM, which is the cornerstone of order flow, the footprint, so on and so forth? Delta is a very easy visual component, especially traders trying to wrap their heads around order flow, right? It's a very easy thing to look at and visually see it being there, it being in the past, and seeing how prices actually trade in and around those areas. So it's just a simpler way to wrap our heads around the use of order flow. Who's getting aggressive at the tops, at the bottoms, who's getting stuck in the market? It's visually seen through the delta profile. Now, these exhaustion bars, right, or absorption bars, call them what you will, these are going to be aggressive buyers and sellers that break down actual cumulative delta in a visual component. So if we take a look at the volume profile of delta first and foremost, I have this one chart somewhere over yonder that gives us a better breakdown of each individual session of delta. So what is it that we're using on this chart? What kind of tools are we kind of going about? Now, when we have blue delta, what I generally associate this with is positive delta, right? You have very aggressive buying and passive selling that's creating this positive delta. The red delta is very aggressive selling and passive buying that's creating that negative delta. So the best rule of thumb is identifying areas that cluster, meaning areas that have several bricks of delta stacked together at highs or at lows, or areas that are very, very pronounced, which are imbalances in theory, right? What I'm looking for is outliers. I'm looking for outliers in delta. So realistically, I can just get any information of what's going on with this delta. So it's not like, oh, a golden rule of thumb that you have to have buying or selling at certain areas. Now, one of the best things to see on any individual day is red delta stacked into the lows, because what that tells us is the passive buyers overpowered the aggressive sellers, and we're trying to hold out support structure in these regions. You can see right here, this was Sunday on the overnight this week, November 30th, right, 11:30, and we're seeing the accumulated cluster of the negative delta at that spot, which is telling me that the passive buyers were powerful enough, right, to hold out the aggressive sellers, trapping them into those lows, suggesting that the clustering, the start of that clustering, is expected to hold some kind of support structure in the market. When we have further clustering throughout the days after, then that's giving me more of an identification that I can look at that area as a region to buy into, as a region of support structure. Now, on the other end of things, as we rally higher, right, we've left behind heavy, heavy positive delta into highs, which is telling us that these aggressive buyers are getting absorbed. Right now, if we manage to push through them, this becomes a support structure where I can lean on the idea that there's going to be long paper towards the tops where this aggressive positive delta sticks out. We align the tops of that area with this support structure. And what do you see here? You see the absorption of the sellers into the lows, allowing us to find that buy side. So a general rule of thumb is if I'm trying to get long towards key area lows, I'm looking for areas that have clustered negative delta so that I can be a part of that movement. You can see on today's individual session, it looks a bit zebra-like. It's fairly flat. You do have absorption into the highs, right, as you did on the overnight. But into the lows, it's not crystal clear. But this is why I look at the larger expansions through those areas like this, because as long as we hold prices above that area and they're rejecting, we're absorbing all that sell side with the passive buying, allowing us to look for that momentum to the upside swing. So I can look at this area over here and we can see, well, wow, that's a lot of blue delta. What happened at that spot? What happened is we had rejections and rotations around that positive delta, which is telling us those passive sellers are starting to really get in control to really knife prices lower. So the way that I look at this is ideally I'm finding the clusters of negative delta towards the lows to find that absorption to allow for prices to move up from that area and the opposite into the highs. Now, let's say tomorrow or on the overnight, we bid through this positive delta area. What I'd be looking for is this area to hold support because now those aggressive buyers are showing some kind of strength and we can take this forth as that potential momentum move to the upside swing. So I'm only really interested in where the clusters are very thick on this delta profile so that I can find support resistances to hold out from an order flow perspective. Now, looking at this delta bar chart over here, this is where things get interesting. This is a study that brings out cumulative delta in relation to an oscillator. So when we start to get very oversold, what happens is we start lighting up red, right? We start getting a little more aggressive to the downside, very aggressive selling, passive buying. You light up blue, we get very aggressive on the buy side with passive sellers coming in. But it's not like, oh, I'm going to trigger my sell or my buy when I start to see these colors light up. What I need to see is rejection from those areas, meaning that once the blue ends and we start to see some of the normal candles out, I know that there's going to be some potential absorption there where I can find that turning point, right? Like here, for instance, at this spot, like here into this low, right? So if I'm looking at this, there's some instances where obviously it doesn't pan out. But a lot of the time, what we're looking for is a confirmation of that absorption to take place and to stop the aggressive buying or selling at key areas. So I'm looking at key areas based on the volume profile naturally. So I'm not just willy-nilly looking at, oh, it's absorbed, it's absorbed. I'm looking at these guys to stall out at a key area, and then we can find that potential reversal. Ideally, it stacks up with an area of delta on the delta profile. So another tool is if I'm at a key support and I see aggressive buying start, that's a trigger for me to be even more aggressive on the buy side with the expectation of an expansion. So you can see here, we have the blue that stops, gray candles. This is the top that I'm expecting absorption to take place. You have a decent area of sell delta here, some buy delta trying to hold out, and I'm looking for that press lower. These guys come in, they get absorbed in and around that area. I have the expectancy that they're going to hold. I can also look at it from the perspective of where the buying or selling starts, right? For these continuous red or blue screens over here and expect some kind of failure at those areas. But that gets too willy-nilly in the weeds with the order flow about this. Instead, I'm looking at it from a simple concept of where is their key support based on my distribution. So for instance, you take a look at the ES over here. You look at the volume profile, this cumulative composite volume profile. The balance low is approximately 22 to 25, 68, 22, 68, 25. So I understand that there have been rejections in and around that area the last several days. The weekly profile aligns with that. So if I'm looking at that, and I know that there's a key area there, what I'm doing is I'm waiting to see if there's going to be some kind of heavy absorption by negative delta on the profile itself, some heavy absorption that stalls out based on these candles. And then that's going to be the point where I can look for that trigger for the longs, right? I can wait for it to come back a little, then hold that negative delta a bit better and try to trigger those longs myself. So a combination of these two delta tools really helps me stay on side and understand order flow a bit better from a visual component, right? I don't necessarily have to stare at the DOM constantly trying to figure out where the buying and selling, where the rebid reoffer is. Instead, I can take a look at this delta and understand where those passive buyers, passive sellers are coming to meet the aggressive traders to hold prices out, not only from a profile perspective that outlines the area, but also from a price action perspective that outlines the candles themselves that allow for that aggression to come through realistically. So if you want to get this chart, we have it pinned in our free Discord, community.tradeproacademy.com. It's a chart made by Chris at Trading Edge Resources, so you guys can go and check that out. Good friend of mine, and he's provided this chart. You can go get it at community.tradeproacademy.com. So instead of fighting with order flow, trying to understand the DOM, depth of market, this and that, what we have here is a nice visual representation of where aggression meets passive traders to identify points of buying or selling, right? Points of interest. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next one.